You grew up hearing this story. A young man demands his inheritance early, wastes it all, ends up feeding pigs, and comes crawling home. His father throws a party. His older brother gets angry. Lesson learned. Go home. But if that is all you saw, you missed the one word that changes everything about what this parable is doing. In Luke chapter 15, verse 12, the son walks up to his father and asks for his portion of his father's Ousia. That single word appears nowhere else in the entire New Testament. Not in Matthew, not in John, not in Paul's letters, nowhere. And Ousia does not simply mean money. The Greek word ousia comes from the verb eimi. That verb means I am. Ousia means being, substance, essence itself. In 325 CE, the entire Christian world tore itself apart over one compound Greek word, homoousios, of one being with the Father. That is ousia at the heart of the Nicene Creed. The most contested word in the history of Christian doctrine appears in this parable, and only in this parable to describe what the son carries out the door. In this reading, the son is not just asking for his share of the estate, he is asking for a portion of his own being, and the father divides it and hands it over freely. This is where the parable becomes a map. Luke 15 reads like the journey of awareness itself, not the story of a distant child in another time. You, the self that receives its portion of existence from its source, gathers everything together and carries it out into a world of sensation and appetite and endless distraction. The text says he gathered all together. He collected it. He packed it. He left. Then the text gives us one more word that deserves attention. He lived in the far country asōtōs. That Greek word is built from the alpha-privative plus sōzō, which means to save. He lived beyond saving, beyond rescue. The one the word names as unsavable is the one the story saves. The label is the setup. Here is the arc this parable is tracing. The self receives its portion of being. It gathers, it travels, it scatters. At some point, the supply runs out and something has to shift. We will walk through exactly how that shift happens. But first, let us go into the far country and see what it actually looks like from the inside. The son arrives in the far country and lives there asōtōs. The text then says something precise. He diaskorpizō his ousia there. That verb diaskorpizō means to scatter, to disperse, like seed thrown into the wind, not spent carefully on real things, not invested poorly, scattered, flung outward in every direction. In this reading, the far country maps to the state of scattered attention. Consciousness dispersed across sensation, appetite, craving, and craving's failure. The self has left its center and is now operating only from its edges. Then a famine arises. The Greek word limos means hunger, shortage, utter lack. And notice the sequence the text sets up. The famine rises after the scattering is complete. The famine does not cause the scattering. The scattering creates the conditions for the famine. In this reading, when awareness moves entirely to the surface of experience and never returns inward, a kind of interior hunger begins that nothing on the outside can address. The son joins himself to a citizen of that far country. The Greek verb is kollao. It means to glue, to cling, to bind tightly. He does not simply take a job. He attaches himself to a foreign authority. He becomes bound to the logic of that place, and the citizen sends him to feed swine. Swine. For the Jewish audience hearing this parable, the image was the absolute floor, ritually unclean animals in a ritually foreign land. In this reading, the swine correspond to the appetites of the outer self, the hungers that cannot be satisfied, the wants that generate more wanting the more they are fed. He desires to eat the keratia the swine eat. That Greek word keratia means little horns, carob pods, small curved husks shaped like horns, real food. The swine ate them freely, but no one gives him any. The text says no one gave him anything, not even the husks. This is the floor the parable insists on. Consciousness that has scattered its being across every surface of the outer world now cannot obtain even the scraps of the outer world's nourishment. The carob pods existed, the food was real, but it was swine food in a far country, and it could not give the son what the father's table had. Nothing was given. The deprivation was complete. Notice also what the text does not say. It does not say he recognized his error at this point. It does not say he felt ashamed. It says he was in lack, he was in want, he needed. The inner condition the parable is mapping here is not moral failure, it is depletion. The self that has scattered its being outward exhausts the outer supply and discovers that the outer supply was never the source. The text makes sure you feel this floor before it takes you further, because what happens next will not make sense unless you have sat for a moment with a man surrounded by pigs, unable to get even the husk they eat, far from his father's house, his Ousia scattered and gone. Here is the sentence the entire parable has been building toward. Luke 15, verse 17. Eis heauton, de elthōn, having come into himself. English translations render this as he came to his senses or he came to himself. But look at what the Greek construction is actually saying. He came into himself, as if the self had been elsewhere, as if this is the moment of arrival. This phrase, eis heauton, was a recognized idiom in the ancient Greek-speaking world. Marcus Aurelius titled his personal journal ta eis heauton, things to himself, the same construction. Plotinus, writing 2 centuries after Luke, described the soul's return to its source using that same movement. Withdraw into yourself and look. Gregory of Nyssa read this verse and wrote that the Son himself is not to be identified with the terrible things he did out there. Those things were alien to him. In truth, Gregory says, he was fleeing from himself when he left the Father's house. In this reading, verse 17 maps to the experience of suddenly realizing that you exist, not emotionally, not as a feeling. The interior awareness that you are here, that you are present, that you have been somewhere else inside yourself for a very long time without noticing. The scattered self, in one moment, collects. Then 3 things happen in exact sequence. I will arise. I will go to my Father. I will say, I have sinned against heaven and before you. In this reading, those 3 movements map to decision, direction, and acknowledgement. The decision comes first, before the movement, before the speech. Arise. The Greek word is anastas, which carries the same root as resurrection. He stands up inside himself before he takes a step. In this reading, the arising is the internal event that precedes the physical return. But notice what the text does next. The Son prepares the speech carefully, he rehearses it, and when he returns in verse 21, and begins to speak, the Father cuts him off mid-sentence. The restoration does not wait for the confession to finish. The Father sees him while he is still a great way off. The Greek word is makron, far. The same spatial word the parable used earlier to describe the far country in verse 13. He was in the far land. Now, still far off on the road, he is already seen, and the Father runs. An older man running in a culture where dignity required stillness. He would have had to hike his outer garment to run. The act would have been visibly humiliating. The Father absorbs the dishonor of the journey publicly before the Son reaches the door. The shame of the scattering is met on the road before a word is exchanged. The running Father arrives first. The Son arrives, he begins his speech. I am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. And the Father does not wait for the sentence to complete. He calls to the servants and gives 4 commands. Each one reverses a specific dimension of what the scattering took. First command, bring forth the first robe. English translations often read best robe. The Greek word is prōtēn. It means first, not best, not finest, first. The first robe, the original one, the one that already belonged to him. Athanasius of Alexandria read this verse and identified it with the garment of glory that preceded the fall. Ambrose of Milan made the same connection. The ancient Gnostic poem called the Hymn of the Pearl ends with a returning prince reunited with his robe of glory, which mirrors his own image. The pattern these readings share is consistent. The garment restored is not a new one, it is the original. In this reading, the first robe corresponds to the original wholeness of the self, not a reward for returning. The robe was always his. He stepped back into what he never stopped being. Second command, a ring. The Greek word is dactylion, a signet ring, not a decoration. A signet ring was the instrument of authority. When Pharaoh gave Joseph his ring in Genesis chapter 41, he was transferring executive power. The Father places that same class of object on his Son's hand. In this reading, the ring corresponds to the restoration of inner authority. The self no longer operates from the outside edges of its own experience. It acts from the center. Third command, sandals. In that culture, slaves went barefoot. Sons wore sandals. The Son had offered to return as a hired servant. The The sandals answer that offer before it finishes leaving his mouth. Fourth command, the fatted calf. The Greek uses the definite article, the calf, a specific animal, always being fattened, always set apart for a specific occasion. And the verb for what happens to it is theo, a word used for sacrifice. This is not just a meal, it is a feast, a communion. Then the father speaks the words that anchor the whole passage. My son was dead, the Greek nekros, and anezēsen, lived again, not came to life for the first time. The prefix ana means again. He lived again, not new, restored, was lost. And heauton was found, not created, found. Something that always existed and could not be located has been located again. Correspondence, not medical claim. The text does not say the son has become a better person. It says something that was dead is alive again. Something that was lost has been found. The language is not moral, it is ontological. It is about what the son is, not what he has done. Now we arrive at the part of the parable most people pass over quickly, and it may carry the most precise observation in the whole text. The older son is in the field. He hears music and dancing from inside the house. He calls a servant and asks what is happening. The servant explains, "Your brother has returned, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he received him safe and sound." And the older son becomes angry and refuses to go in. The father comes out to him. The same man who ran down the road toward the returning younger son now leaves the feast to find the older one standing outside in the dark. The older son speaks. He says, "These many years I serve you." The Greek verb he chooses is douleuō. I have slaved for you. That is not the language of a son. That is the language of a hired hand. He has lived in the father's house for years and experienced it as employment. He has never once asked for even a small goat to celebrate with friends. The text says explicitly in verse 31 that all the father has was always his. Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was never withheld. He never reached for it. And then he calls his brother, this son of yours. Not my brother, not your son who returned, this son of yours. He refuses the family bond, even in his speech. In this reading, the older brother maps to the part of the self that follows every rule, keeps every obligation, stays close to the source, and still relates to it as an employer. He is proximate without being present. He has never left the father's house and has never entered the feast that belongs to him. He obeys without receiving. He serves without feasting. He is in the right location and standing outside the right door. The father answers with the most tender word in the entire passage, teknon, not the formal word huios for son, the intimate word for child, the word a parent uses with a very young child. Then the father says the thing that only makes sense if the feast was always available. You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. All that I have is thine. The parable ends without resolution. The text never tells us whether the older son goes inside. The story closes with the door still open and the older son still standing outside. That open ending reads like a direct question. The feast is happening. The father has come out to you. What are you doing with that? Notice that Luke frames this entire chapter, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son, in response to one specific complaint. The Pharisees and scribes grumbled because Jesus ate with tax collectors and sinners. The elder brother's complaint mirrors theirs. In this reading, the parable suggests that religious proximity to the source does not automatically produce intimacy with it. The elder brother is the proof. He slept in the house, he never entered it. You have heard the passage, you have seen the Greek, you have walked through each object and each verb. Now the parable leaves you with one question. Where is your attention right now? The son in the far country did not suffer from bad character. He suffered from scattered attention. He diaskorpizō his Ousia. He scattered his being across a world that could not hold it. And the return did not begin with an action. It began with a single moment of noticing. Heauton de elthōn. He came into himself. The text gives us two things to carry out of this passage. Both are small. Neither requires anything external. First, once each day, stop in the middle of whatever you are doing and ask yourself one question. Am I here? Not am I doing this correctly? Not am I performing well? Am I here? Am I present inside my own experience right now? You are not looking for a feeling. You are looking for the gap. The gap between what you are doing and your awareness that you are doing it, that gap is the far country. Noticing is the turn. This takes under a minute. It is tied to verse 17 and the phrase, heauton, coming into yourself. Second, before you take in anything, a meal, a screen, a conversation, pause for one breath and ask yourself one question. Does this nourish or does this fill? The keratia were real food. The pigs ate freely. They were edible. The problem was not that they existed. The problem was that they could not give the son what the Father's table had. The practice is learning to notice the difference between what fills and what nourishes, not as judgment, as observation. This takes about 2 minutes. It is tied to verse 16 and the image of the little horns that satisfied nothing. The parable does not end with a moral lesson. It ends with a feast that is already happening and a door that is standing open. The robe exists, the ring exists, the sandals exist. They are not earned by returning. The text is clear on this. The father saw his son coming from a great way off and ran toward him before he arrived. The restoration began before the son reached the door. The first robe is yours. The question the parable leaves open is the same one it has always been asking. Are you walking toward the house, or are you still standing outside in the field, working out whether you deserve to go in? The parable has no moral at the end, no call to do better next time, no instruction to try harder. The father ran, the father restored, the father feasted, and then he left the feast again to stand in the dark outside and ask his other son to come in. In this reading, the source is always moving towards you. The text's final image is not a son at the table. It is a father outside in the night, asking someone still standing in the field to come home. The text says, you already know the answer. Come to yourself and walk.